I need your clothes, your boots, and your motorcycle. So yeah, we are now on to my third favourite film of all time, which is Terminator 2 Judgment Day, starring my second favourite actor, Arnold Schwarzenegger. Now, when I first saw this film, I was quite young, and also I hadn't actually seen the first film, so my dad had to give me a little bit of a rundown of the plot. But at that age, I was a little bit confused about the idea that A, Arnold's character was the bad guy in the first film, and B, he was back in this film after he'd supposedly been crushed in the first one. And watching it at that age, I wasn't traumatized by it, but there were a few bits that did freak me out. I think probably the worst one was where the security guard gets stabbed by the T-1000 through the eye, and you can see his other eye rolling in its socket. And then later on there's that nightmare that Sarah Connor has about the nuclear explosion, which I still don't particularly like watching now. But now that I'm older and I've seen the film quite a lot of times, I do appreciate just how good it is for all the different qualities about it. It does often get called one of the greatest sequels of all time, and it does certainly go the right way in continuing from the first film. It does escalate its original concept from having a human against a Terminator to having a Terminator against a more advanced Terminator. But at the same time, it's taking the story in a natural direction from where it ended in the first film. In my mind, Terminator 2 is the best action film ever. You could say it's a thinking man's action film. It's got a complex story and themes. There's time spent properly developing the characters. It explores themes like the self-destructive nature of humanity and where our development of technology might eventually lead us, but at the same time saying that there is ultimately hope for the future still. And all of that without really shoving it in your face. This was made in 1991, 2 years before Jurassic Park, and yet the computer effects still definitely hold up, particularly the T-1000. Still looks brilliant. I really love the instrumental soundtrack by Brad Friedel and also the detail of the cinematography as well. I mean, James Cameron is one of those directors who pays a lot of attention to his backgrounds, or at least he shows them in quite a lot of clarity. I mean, when the Terminator goes into the bar towards the beginning of the film, you can see all the background characters who are going to get involved later on in the scene. And when the police arrive at the Cyberdyne headquarters, you can see all the individual vehicles that are going to get involved as well. And later on, as the helicopter is chasing the truck down the highway, you can see the big nitrogen tanker that's going to become relevant in a few minutes' time. While the first film is pretty grim throughout, this one does have a few more humorous moments, though a lot of the time, quite appropriately, it is quite dark humour. Like after the Terminator has sworn to John that he won't kill anybody and goes up to this guard and shoots him in the kneecaps and is just like, he'll live. Or later on when the T-1000 melts through the bars of this security gate and he gets stuck for a moment because the gun that he's holding isn't liquid metal like he is. I suppose when people were first watching this in cinemas, it is meant to be a surprise that Arnold's Terminator is the good guy this time round. But you do get kind of hints of it when he first shows up. It's quite a different atmosphere, his opening scene to when he first appeared in the 1984 film and rips a guy's heart out of his chest. He's going into this crowded bar and there's this quite jaunty country music playing in the background, and even when he starts roughing the bikers up, he doesn't actually kill anybody. And after he's got his clothes and he leaves the bar, Bad to the Bone is playing, which does seem to make him look more like a hero. And he finishes that scene off by taking away the bar owner's shades, presumably just because they make him look cool. This is basically the perfect role for Arnold Schwarzenegger. It is definitely a role that plays to his strengths, and it's very impressive how the film is able to give some real character progression to what is basically an emotionless machine. In the director's cut, we see Sarah and John Connor resetting his processor and activating his learning function, and after that he becomes more curious about the world. He's confused about the concept of crying and pain, and when he's asked if he's afraid of dying, he has this quite questioning tone about it. He ends up becoming this father figure for young John Connor, even though he can't really love him, he would never mistreat him. As Sarah says, in an insane world, it's the sanest choice. The film doesn't really give the Terminator any big moments of revelation. It's more like he gradually processes things and starts to become a little bit more human as time goes by. By the time we get to the Cyberdyne headquarters, he's acting like a proper action hero, blowing things up and destroying all the police cars and throwing a few one-liners, jumping onto the nitrogen tanker and then riding it. And he does subtle things like when he's demonstrating a remote control, he goes like and then smiling at John and saying, "Trust me." You wonder how he got it in his head to do those things, and maybe it's just a matter of watching people and processing. And then you have Sarah Connor, played by Linda Hamilton, and her story is pretty much a continuation from the first film. It's like the consequences of what happened there and her knowing about what's going to happen in the future. And it's turned her into this very different character from the first film, quite intimidating and a bit of a psychological wreck. and certainly a very interesting character. Most times you see her in the film, she's constantly looking intense and under pressure and tormented. She gets into a bit of conflict with her son John because she's totally focused on his ultimate purpose. That's all that matters to her. And then after Sarah finds out about Miles Dyson, the man who's going to create Skynet, she pretty much becomes a Terminator herself when she goes out to kill him. But ultimately she is still human. She finds that when she's looking the man in the eye, she can't do it. At that point she's able to connect with John a bit more. That's the point where she tells him that she loves him. And by the end of the film she's rediscovered her hope for humanity. John Connor himself, maybe he is a little bit bratty, but not like completely insufferable. He is fairly engaging, and I do like watching his interactions with the Terminator when it would have been quite easy for them to be quite annoying. And then there's the T-1000, definitely one of my favourite movie villains ever. Having a man like Robert Patrick in the role, he forms this great contrast to Arnold. He's lean and agile, and he looks less dangerous. And yet, in terms of just physical strength alone, he's just as strong as Arnold, and his liquid metal construction just makes him almost impossible to harm. And he has this great look in his eyes when he's hunting his prey, just this intense, cold stare. Just the first time these two Terminators meet each other, the T-1000 is going at Arnold with his little pistol, and Arnold's like a tank just slowly walking towards him, firing with his shotgun. And then at the end of that, the T-1000 is unharmed. We then get this pretty scary chase sequence in the aqueducts, and it is pretty scary how John manages to get his dirt bike going just as the T-1000 comes out the door. That's like something straight out of a nightmare. And the whole chase sequence is a great example of how, in terms of the action sequences in this movie, less is more. It's really just this quite simple chase involving two motorbikes and a truck. And then at the end of it, there's just this one big explosion, whereas if, say, Michael Bay was directing it, there'd be like explosions going off all over the place. And it's a great way of showing just how the T-1000 is just on another level compared to Arnold's Terminator. I mean, Arnold's Terminator in the first film was like blown up in a truck towards the end, and that crippled him quite badly. Whereas the T-1000 is blown up in a truck at the end of the first act of this film, and he's absolutely fine. There's not a scratch on him. Then we get another chase sequence involving the T-1000 when the Terminator and John and Sarah are getting out of the hospital and he's coming after them. And that's just so scary when he gets so close to them on the back of the car. There's just so little between him and them. And then once that's over and they've gotten away, we don't actually see the T-1000 again for almost 40 minutes. Again, I'm talking from the director's cut. And at that point we're able to relax a bit and focus on developing the characters and go off in this different direction with trying to prevent Judgment Day altogether. There's like these two different stories of like running away from the T-1000 and then trying to actually change the future, and the film doesn't let them clash too much. We get another big action sequence at the Cyberdyne headquarters, and again the explosions and the gunfire look quite dramatic, but they are quite low scale compared to a lot of other action films that you see, especially these days. And then once that's over, for the last half hour or so, we're back to being chased by the T-1000. First off, the heroes are in this armoured truck going down the highway, and the T-1000's in a helicopter, which is a pretty cool concept on its own, even though it's really just basic chasing and shooting again. And it still works because you care about the protagonists, and they can and do get hurt in the process. And they constantly look like the underdogs. I mean, first off, they're in a truck and he's in a helicopter, and then after a little bit they change vehicles, so the heroes are in this ponderous little gardening truck, and the T-1000 is in this big nitrogen tanker coming after them. We get to this steel mill, and when the truck crashes, the T-1000 gets frozen in the nitrogen. And that's the first moment in the film that he ever seems a little bit vulnerable, which is very good in creating a little bit of hope for the audience that he could ultimately be defeated. But unfortunately the T-1000 is still on his feet again, and again the heroes are just struggling slowly along while he's slowly coming after them with this unrelenting stare. He just keeps coming no matter what. We get some more hand-to-hand combat between the two Terminators, and by now Arnold is looking very battered and broken next to this untouchable thing. And yet the thing about Terminators, as Kyle Reese said in the first film, is that they never ever give up. And in the first film that made Arnold pretty terrifying, and here in the second film it becomes a virtue. No matter what the T-1000 does to him, he's never going to stop trying to beat him. We finally get to the ending where the T-1000 does get destroyed in some molten steel, and after everything we've seen, I really love watching this thing die. Very satisfying. But soon after that, Arnold's Terminator has to be melted down as well, and when I was watching this as a kid, this was the other film besides Forrest Gump that I do remember making me cry. I was distraught when the Terminator dies. The music is really good in this scene, this kind of sad version of the main theme, and I still certainly feel quite sad when I watch it. So those are my thoughts on Terminator 2 Judgment Day, so let me know what you think of it in the comments. I'll be back.